The hatchling had a name that no one used anymore. When he had first cracked out of his shell, the hall attendants had written Rail in the registry with careful hands. They had measured his wingspan, noted his scale color, gray-brown, dull, unremarkable, and assigned him a numbered spot in the warm sleeping rows with all the others. That was 3 cycles ago. The others were gone now. Bonded, named, carried off to new lives on the backs of warriors and mages and nobles, who had pressed their palms to a hatchling's snout, and felt the pull of a bond catch fire between them. Rail had waited at every ceremony with his head up and his eyes steady. He had learned, after the first one, not to step forward too eagerly. After the second, not to hold eye contact too long. After the third, not to hope. The hall attendant who moved him to the back room was not cruel about it. She carried the data slate with his file and walked ahead of him down a corridor that grew quieter the further they went, and she opened a door into a small, warm room with 4 other hatchlings who had also not been chosen. She called it the overflow chamber. The hatchlings among themselves called it something else. The shelf. Rail found a corner and sat in it. One of the other hatchlings, a green-scaled female named Asa, looked at him and said nothing. They had all said everything there was to say to each other a long time ago. Commander Des came by in the evening. He was a tall Drakari officer with blue-gray scales and a straight spine, and a way of looking at things he could not fix that made his jaw tight. He stood in the doorway of the shelf room and looked at the 5 of them and made a note on his data slate and left. He always made the note. Nothing ever came of it. Rail put his chin on his forelegs and watched the ceiling. Outpost Varen was not the kind of place that appeared on travel maps. It sat at the edge of Drakari space like a bolt someone had dropped and not bothered to pick up, a mid-tier fuel depot and repair bay that processed tanker traffic and maintenance work for ships that were either too big, too old, or too stubborn to go anywhere nicer. The staff was rotating. The food was acceptable. The shifts were long. Owen had worked there for 4 years. He was not tall. He was not loud. He had a habit of arriving 10 minutes early and leaving 10 minutes late, and neither of those things had ever been remarked upon by anyone. His hands were permanently stained with fuel sealant, and there was a small scar on his left thumb from the time a compression bolt had slipped during his 2nd month on the job. He had fixed the compressor anyway, and not mentioned the injury until the following week when someone noticed the bandage. That night, Bay 7 had a problem. The fuel compressor in Bay 7 had been making a sound for 6 days. 3 mechanics had looked at it and written variations of "requires specialist assessment" in the maintenance log, which was a polite way of saying they did not want to deal with it. The specialist assessment request had been sitting in Supervisor Yuna's queue for 4 days. Bay 7 had been locked off from use, which was costing the outpost money, which nobody had connected back to the sitting request yet. Owen connected it. He pulled the log at the end of his shift, read through it, pulled the technical specs for that compressor model, and then went to Bay 7 with a torch and a diagnostic kit and the particular expression of a man who finds disorder mildly offensive. The problem turned out to be a cracked resonance sleeve inside the secondary pressure chamber. It was not a simple fix. It required partially dismantling the upper compression housing, working in a space roughly the size of a storage locker, and tolerating a smell that was best described as burnt ambition. Owen did all of these things. He worked with the focused quiet of someone who is not performing for anyone, because there was no one there to perform for. At 2 in the morning, the compressor ran clean. Owen ran the diagnostic twice, wrote a full repair note in the log with the part number and the method and the time, and then locked Bay 7 back up and went to get something to eat. There was cold rice left in the mess hall. He ate it standing at the counter and read through the next week's maintenance schedule. In the morning, Supervisor Yuna reviewed the log, saw that Bay 7 was operational, said "good," finally, to no one in particular, and assigned the efficiency credit to the Bay 7 maintenance team, which was a three-person unit that had not been in Bay 7 since the original inspection. Owen saw the credit assignment on the board at the start of his shift. He looked at it for a moment. Then he picked up his kit and went to Bay 3, where a coolant line had been quietly dripping for 2 days and nobody had flagged it yet. He had noticed it on Tuesday. He had not said anything because he was going to fix it anyway, and saying something first felt like asking for attention he did not need. Somewhere across Drakari space, in a warm room at the end of a quiet corridor, Rail put his chin on his forelegs and watched the ceiling and did not sleep. Neither of them knew the other existed yet. That was about to change. The shipping manifest said, Industrial Parts Bay 4 Mechanical. That was all it said. The transport had come in from the Drakari interior on a standard supply run, fuel additives, replacement plating for the station's outer hull, 2 crates of food rations for the biological staff wing, and 1 sealed container roughly the size of a large storage trunk. The container was dark gray with ventilation slots along the sides, and a small amber light blinking slowly on the top panel, which meant whatever was inside was alive and stable. The dock sorting system read the manifest code, matched it to Bay 4 Mechanical, and assigned it to the next available handler. The next available handler was Owen, who had just finished logging a filter replacement in Bay 2 and was walking back with an empty parts tray when the routing notification blinked on his wrist unit. He found the crate on Dock 7. He scanned it. The system confirmed the destination. He loaded it onto a float cart and pushed it to Bay 4 without thinking much about it, because the job was to move it, and so he moved it. He set it down in the clearing beside his main workbench, and went back to the coolant calibration he had been in the middle of. 20 minutes later, he noticed the amber light had turned green. He looked at the crate. He looked at the calibration readout. He looked at the crate again. Green lights on biological containment units meant the internal atmosphere had equalized with the outside environment, which was a thing that happened when the seal was released. Owen had not released the seal. He walked over and crouched down to look at the ventilation slots. A pair of eyes looked back at him. They were copper-colored and very still, and they belonged to something small and scaled that was pressed into the far corner of the crate's interior with the specific stillness of a creature that has learned to make itself unnoticeable. Owen sat back on his heels. He looked at the eyes. The eyes looked at him. He pulled up the manifest code on his wrist unit and cross-referenced it with the station cargo system. The system returned an error, then a flag, then a redirect to the biological holding unit, where the crate was supposed to have gone. Somewhere between dispatch and outpost Varen, a single routing digit had been entered wrong, and a living creature had been sent to a mechanical bay. Owen looked at the ventilation slots again. He could see one foreleg now, pulled tight against a small body. There was a dark mark on it, a cut, dried at the edges, not fresh but not clean either. He opened the crate. He did not make a big movement of it. He simply unlatched the front panel and let it drop open and then stepped back and waited. The creature inside did not run. It looked at the open door and then at Owen and then at the open door again, and then it stayed exactly where it was. It was a dragon hatchling, small, gray-brown scaled, with wings folded flat against its back and a jaw that was set in a way that suggested it had been through enough that surprises did not surprise it much anymore. Owen noted the cut on the foreleg. He went to his wall cabinet, found the basic medical kit he had added during his first month, and took out an antiseptic cloth and equipment tape. He came back and crouched beside the open crate. The hatchling watched him. Owen did not reach in. He set the supplies on the floor within sight, sat back against the workbench leg, and waited. After a while, the hatchling moved forward. It stopped at the edge of the crate and looked at the antiseptic cloth and then at Owen's hands. Owen held both hands open where they could be seen. The hatchling put one foot out of the crate, and then the other, and then it stood on the bay floor and held the cut foreleg out, not exactly, but close enough. an angle that put it within reach. Owen cleaned the cut. The hatchling made no sound. Owen applied the tape in 2 clean passes, not too tight, and sat back. Then he picked up his wrist unit and calmed the docking authority. "This is Technician Owen at Outpost Varan, Bay 4 Mechanical. I have a mislabeled biological containment unit here. Manifest error. It was routed to my bay instead of biological holding. I've got a Drakari hatchling. Looks like it's been in transit a while. I need a redirect confirmation and collection timeline." The system played hold music. Owen sat on the floor of Bay 4 and listened to the hold music and looked at the hatchling, who had not moved back to the crate. It was sitting on the bay floor about 2 feet from him, looking at the calibration equipment on his workbench with an expression that was hard to read, but did not look like fear. Owen reached over without standing up and picked up the coolant calibration tool he had been using earlier. He turned back to the panel he had been working on. The hold music continued. The hatchling watched him work. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them felt the particular need to. The amber light on the crate had gone dark. The bay hummed with its usual low mechanical noise. Outside, a fuel tanker drifted past the station window and the stars slid slowly behind it, and inside Bay 4, something had shifted in a way that neither of them had any word for yet. Owen was still on hold when his shift technically ended. He did not leave. The hold music had been the same looping 8 seconds of tone for an hour and 40 minutes. Owen had counted. He knew it was 8 seconds because at some point during the second hour, he had started timing it without meaning to, the way he sometimes counted bolt turns without thinking. His wrist unit was propped against the base of the workbench, hold music playing at low volume, and Owen was lying on his back under the Bay 4 primary fuel relay panel with a torque driver in one hand and a light between his teeth. The relay housing had 3 fasteners that had not been properly seated since the last service cycle. He had noticed them the week before and added them to the pending log. The pending log had not moved. He was fixing them now because he was here anyway. Rail sat 2 feet from his boots and watched. He had not gone back to the crate. He had moved, in the past hour, from the bay floor to a low equipment shelf on the left wall, where he could see both the crate and Owen at the same time. His tail was curled around his feet. His wings were still flat against his back. He was watching with the intense, still attention of a creature that has learned to understand environments by studying them before entering them. Owen pulled the 3rd fastener free, examined it, found the thread stripped, and said, "There it is," to no one in particular. Rail's ears moved. Owen did not look out from under the panel. He kept working, talking in the loose way he always did when he was deep in a job, not explaining, just narrating, the way some people hum. "Thread stripped on this one. That's why the housing's been vibrating. Stripped thread means the fastener can't hold torque. Can't hold torque means the whole relay panel absorbs the vibration instead, and that vibration travels down the line and shows up 2 bays over as a compressor noise that everyone thinks is a different problem." He came out from under the panel and sat up and found the right replacement fastener in the tray beside him. Rail was looking at the fastener tray. Owen glanced at him. He did not make a big thing of it. He held up the replacement between 2 fingers. "This is a M8 hex bolt. See the threading? Full thread, no damage. This is what it's supposed to look like." Rail looked at the bolt. Owen went back under the panel. This continued for the next 40 minutes. Owen explained the relay housing. He explained what a fuel relay did in general terms, keeping the language simple the way he would explain something to a new apprentice. He described what the vibration pattern had sounded like and how he had traced it back. He was not performing. He was simply someone who processed his work out loud when no one was listening, and right now something was listening, so the habit continued. The hold music cut out. A voice came through, automated, flat. "Docking Authority dispatch. Please state your request." Owen came out from under the panel and picked up the wrist unit. Technician Owen, Outpost Varen Bay 4. I reported a mislabeled biological containment unit 2 hours ago. Drakari Hatchling, routed to mechanical by manifest error. I need a collection timeline and a confirmation that the holding unit has been notified. A pause typing sounds. We show a flag on that manifest. Biological holding unit has been notified. Collection will be arranged through the originating Drakari Transport Authority. Estimated processing time is 2 to 3 standard days. Understood. The hatchling is secure and the bay environment is stable. I'll maintain until collection. Noted. Reference number is filed. The line closed. Owen set the wrist unit down and looked at Rail. Rail looked back. The copper eyes were steady, giving nothing away, but there was something different in them from when Owen had first opened the crate. Earlier they had been pressed into the back corner. Now they were at eye level, 8 feet away, watchful in a way that was not fearful. Owen pulled a ration bar from his jacket pocket, broke off a piece, and set it on the shelf near Rail. He had checked earlier, not toxic to Drakari hatchlings at this growth stage. Rail looked at the piece of ration bar. He looked at Owen. He ate it. Owen went back to the panel. The shift ended and Owen did not leave. He sent a message to Bay 3 saying he was staying over on a voluntary maintenance hold and would cover the overnight log checks. No one questioned this. He pulled a folding chair over to his workbench and started on the secondary calibration for the coolant system, which was a task he had set aside for next week, but which was there and needed doing. Rail came off the shelf at some point past midnight. Owen did not see exactly when it happened. He was focused on the calibration readout, but when he glanced over, Rail was on the floor beside his chair, wings folded, chin down, watching the bay door with the settled look of a creature that has decided a place is safe enough to rest in. Owen turned back to the calibration. 2 days and a few hours left on the collection timeline. He did not think about that yet. There was work in front of him and it needed doing, and the bay was warm. And for the first time in longer than he could easily measure, the silence in Bay 4 felt less like the absence of something and more like the presence of it. He kept working. On the second day, Owen got the food wrong twice. The first time, he brought back something from the mess hall with a high sulfur content, a grain paste that most of the Drakari station staff ate without issue. Rail sniffed it once and turned his head away with a slowness that was more dismissal than disgust. Owen looked at the container, made a note on his wrist unit, and ate it himself. The second time, he tried a protein block from the standard ration supply. Rail took one bite, set the rest down very carefully, and went back to watching the bay door. Owen took that as a polite no. He spent 20 minutes during lunch reading Drakari hatchling dietary information on the station biological database, a file that had been uploaded 3 years ago for the 1-month period when a Drakari diplomatic team had been stationed at Varen. He found the section on early growth stage requirements, high mineral content, certain proteins, specific fats. He cross-referenced it against the station supply manifest and found that the closest match was in a deep-sea protein supplement kept in the biological unit stock. He filed a requisition form. He listed the reason as hatchling in temporary holding, Bay 4. The form was approved 6 hours later by someone who had not read it because the approval note said, "Ensure equipment is cleaned post-use." He brought Rail the supplement mixed with warm water in a clean calibration bowl. Rail ate the entire thing. Owen wrote the correct item number in his notes. The days had taken on a shape that neither of them had planned. Owen arrived at Bay 4 at the start of his shift, which now began earlier because he came in before the shift officially started. He worked. He talked about the work. Rail watched, moved closer over the course of the day, and by afternoon was almost always within a few feet of wherever Owen was. On the afternoon of the second day, Owen was lying under the coolant access panel on the north wall when Rail made a sound, low, a single note, almost like a word that had not decided to become a word yet. Owen came out from under the panel. Rail was standing at the workbench, looking at the tool tray. His tail was held straight and still. He looked at Owen, then at the tray, then at Owen again. Owen looked at the tray. He had been about to ask for the torque adapter, a specific tool, not the largest, with a red handle grip. It was the next logical step in the job. He was midway through. He had not said anything because he had only just stood up. Rail nudged the red-handled adapter forward with one claw, very slightly, just enough. Owen picked it up. He looked at Rail. Rail looked back with the expression of a creature that was not going to explain itself. "Thanks," Owen said, and went back under the panel. He used the word the way he used it with anyone. Not softer, not louder. Just thanks, which was what you said when something helped you. Rail stood at the workbench for another moment. Then he sat down beside the panel access and watched. Owen, under the panel, noted that his hands had steadied without meaning to. There was something different about having company that understood what you were doing. He had spent 4 years explaining himself to no one, and the habit had made him efficient. But efficiency was not the same as ease, and right now the work felt easy. At 2 hours past midnight, Owen woke up from a half-sleep in his chair to find Rail standing at the bay door. Not scratching at it, not making noise, just standing alert with his head angled toward the corridor wall on the right side. His scales were raised slightly along his spine, the Dracari equivalent, Owen had read, of the hairs on a human neck going up. Owen got up. He went to the bay panel and pulled up the pressure readout for the adjacent corridor. There was a variance in the number, small, outside the normal range, the kind of thing that would not have triggered the automated alert for another hour. He opened the bay door and found the pressure valve in the adjacent corridor with a hairline fracture along the seal. If it had gone another hour, the pressure would have backed into the ventilation system and caused a flash fire in the ceiling channels. He had the valve replaced in 35 minutes. He filed the incident report before going back to bed. Under cause of early detection, he wrote, "Routine monitoring." He did not know how to write what had actually happened. In the morning, the outpost safety log flagged his report as a preventive catch and listed his name under the shift commendation column. It was the first time in 4 years his name had appeared in the column. Una sent him a message that said, "Good catch." He read it, then put his wrist unit down and went to check on Rail, who was awake and waiting, and had already nudged the correct wrench toward the edge of the workbench, in advance of a job Owen had not started yet. Owen stood in the doorway of Bay 4 and looked at the hatchling and thought about a lot of things he did not have the right words for. He thought about what it meant for something to notice you. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of person or creature that watched and learned and helped without being asked. He went to the workbench and picked up the wrench. One more day. He did not think about the day after that. Commander Des arrived at Outpost Varen on the 3rd morning, in a way that suggested he had not slept well. He was a tall Dracari officer with the kind of posture that came from decades of standing at attention, and eyes that came from decades of seeing things he could not fix. He had a data slate under one arm and 2 transport staff behind him, and the official expression of someone executing a procedure that was going to go smoothly. He found Owen in Bay 4 replacing a worn gasket on the secondary coolant line. He found Rail beside Owen, watching the gasket replacement with the focused attention of a student who has decided that understanding the work is more important than being told what it is. Des stopped in the doorway. He looked at the hatchling. He looked at the human. He looked at the way Rail's posture was angled toward Owen, the way a plant angles toward light, not a dramatic lean, just a quiet orientation, a default position that the body had settled into without being instructed to. He consulted his data slate. You are Technician Owen. Owen stood up, wiped his hands on a cloth, and nodded. Yes, sir. I am here to collect the hatchling. Des looked at Rail. He was mislabeled in transit. He will be returned to the bonding halls pending reassignment. Rail looked at Des. Then he looked at Owen. Then he sat down. He sat down in the specific way of a creature that had made a decision and was communicating it as clearly as possible without using words. His feet were planted. His tail was wrapped around them. His wings were folded. He was not panicking and he was not growling. He was simply staying. Des looked at the transport team. They looked at each other. Rail, Des said, come. Rail looked at the bay door that Des had come through. He looked at Owen. He did not move. Des set the data slate down on the nearest surface and crossed his arms. He had been a commander for 19 years, and he had seen a great many things, but a 3-cycle unchosen hatchling refusing a direct instruction in the presence of a human maintenance technician was not among them. He looked at Owen. Did you initiate contact with the hatchling in any ritual or ceremonial capacity? Owen considered this. I cleaned a cut on his leg, I gave him food, I talked while I was working. Did you attempt a bond? No. Des studied him. Owen met the study with a straightforward expression that contained no performance and no attempt to seem more or less important than he was. He was mislabeled, Owen said. I kept him safe until someone came, that's all. Des looked at Rail again. The hatchling had not moved. There was a procedure for this. It was buried in the Drakari bonding code under a section titled Irregular Bond Formation, which had been written 400 years ago by an administrator who had clearly expected it to be used perhaps twice in a century. It had been used 11 times total. It covered situations where a hatchling formed a spontaneous bond outside the ceremony, typically due to crisis conditions. It required documentation, review, and the recorded consent of both parties. It did not specify that both parties had to be Drakari. Des was quiet for a long moment. His jaw did the thing it did when he was looking at something he could not fix, except this time it did not tighten. It loosened, slowly, in the way of a man who has just realized that something he expected to be broken might not be. He picked up the data slate. I am going to ask you a question for the official record, he said to Owen. You may decline to answer, and if you decline, the collection will proceed and the hatchling will be returned to the halls. Do you understand? Owen nodded. Des looked at Rail once more. The hatchling was watching Owen. Not Des, not the transport team, not the door. Owen. Technician Owen, Des said. Do you consent to the registration of an irregular bond with this hatchling, under full acknowledgement that such a bond carries lifelong obligations under Drakari law, is irrevocable once filed, and will require documented review by the bonding authority within 60 standard days? The bay was very quiet. Owen looked at Rail. Rail looked back. The copper eyes were steady, and they held the particular quality of something that was not asking for anything, because it had stopped believing that asking worked. It was just watching, waiting to learn what the world was going to do next. Owen had spent 4 years at Outpost Varen doing jobs nobody else wanted, fixing things nobody else noticed, and being thanked in ways that went to someone else. He had not thought of himself as remarkable, just the person who showed up. He looked at Rail for a moment longer. Then he said yes. Des made the notation on the data slate with the careful hand of a man marking something that matters. He did not say anything unnecessary. He simply noted the consent, flagged the file for bonding authority review, and looked at his transport team. Stand down, he said. We are returning with a registration, not a cargo. He looked at Owen once more before leaving. It was not the look of a man conducting an inspection. It was something quieter than that, the look of someone who has been carrying a small guilt for a long time and has just found out it is lighter now. He left without saying what it was. Rail did not watch him go. He had already turned back toward the workbench. There was a wrench waiting where it needed to be.